Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Continuing with our session of building a culture of innovation, I have two young panelists with me who have driven innovation, one by starting something new and coming out of the family business, and another one who has been leading innovation from last 1 decade, if I'm not wrong. Okay. So before we start and get into the discussion mode, Shruti and Aditya, I would appreciate if you could give a little brief on your organization and what you're leading.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. It's lovely to be back in Delhi after a long time away. So Tamara Leisure Experiences is an organization focused on the idea of responsible hospitality. So we typically design, build, and operate our hotels and resorts around so far it's been around South India, but we also own some hotels in Germany. Our focus is really on this idea that hotels and resorts can be run in a way which is far more responsible in that we can be less wasteful, we can have better people practices, and we can be significantly positively impacting the environment and the communities in which we exist. We operate in 3 brands. We work in the luxury leisure space, in the upscale business space, as well as in the mid-segment space. And we've been doing this now for about 10 years.
Wow.
Thanks, Shruti. A very good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be back here after the pandemic to be at the Entrepreneur platform. So Bagrry's is an FMCG, breakfast cereals and health foods business, largely driven with the sole purpose of putting something very honest, clean label and genuine on the shelf. We started out as an experiment in the early 90s, which was passion driven. I'm second generation in the business, and this was more of my father's brainchild, and his vision was to put something which was inspired by the writings of Mahatma Gandhi, that the most nutritious part of the grain is actually in the outer layer, which is the bran, which is where all the fiber and all the micronutrients sit. And unfortunately in our line of work, which was grain milling, we used to throw that away and use the inner part, which was the starchy part of the grain. So that's where we started out of, and largely we've been pioneers in the space of introducing certain categories to India as far as muesli and oats and high fiber foods such as bran are concerned. But our vision, which your colleague had articulated, is to be India's most trusted brand for health. And we've been creating a portfolio of breakfast cereals and health foods. Today we are there in about 9 countries where we operate out of, and largely in the Indian subcontinent, but also the largest homegrown brand in the breakfast cereal space. But our vision is to be a very trustworthy brand, and trust for us is more important than scale, because in the space of health and nutrition, it is consumer trust what we are aiming to get. And with that regard, we've been constantly innovating and creating new categories. So be it in the breakfast cereal space, such as the kids cereal space or the cornflake space, or healthy snacking and many other avenues, so which I'm sure we'll talk about in the session.
Sure. Thank you, Aditya. Thanks, Shruti. Shruti, when we talk about innovation, we always think about doing something different, and that's what you have been doing. So when was the time you said, okay, I want to get into something new, and that too, not even in the same sector, which is technology? You thought about building something in the hospitality space. So how the idea came in to start Tamara?
So in fact, I actually also worked in the banks. At one point, I worked at Merrill Lynch. And when I was in finance for a while, and really came about to a point where I said, I want a project. I want to have ownership over what I do. Not really thinking about the word entrepreneurship at all at that point, but I guess that's what it was. So I was living in the US, I moved back to India, and I actually co-founded a restaurant business. And that was my first sort of entry into the space, and I loved it. It's, hospitality is a business, you either love it or you hate it. And, it was one of those things that it really, I loved it because it's a people-driven, people-focused business. It's all about service and this value system that comes with it, which is really something that I connect with. And I feel is very honorable, almost. And so that's how I got into the space. And then from the restaurants, that sort of evolved into this hotel business that we got into after that. And it's been a really interesting journey. I think, you mentioned, my family was in technology for, in the previous generation. And I think the way that I approach our business today is really thinking about how can we use technology in a way that really impacts this very traditional sort of a business which has existed for centuries. And so we really utilize technology. We're much more open to it, I would say, and dynamic in terms of how we accept and embrace technology into multiple facets. So, of course, improving efficiency, improving operations, but also things like improving guest experiences, and really thinking out of the box about how you can use technology in a way which impacts every single person who comes into one of our hotels or resorts. And one that is, it doesn't take the people out of it. It just kind of enhances the way that people can do their work and how we can provide better service and create better jobs for the people that work within us as well.
Sure. But during COVID, did you ever think about, okay, why didn't I start a tech business? Because digital transformation has surely taken a leap in the last 2 years.
Yeah, it certainly has. Yeah. It's been, we really have come a long way. And I think during COVID, particularly when COVID was a very tumultuous time for our industry. But what actually happened, which was really interesting, was that it kind of gave us a little bit of time to breathe and refocus on how we could, relook at these fundamentals. And so technology was one of the first things that we focused on in terms of really rethinking, like, how can we use technology to communicate better with everybody, right? Whether it was our guests, whether it was our community, whether it was our staff. How can we use technology to improve our systems? So it was an incredible time, actually, and a very innovative time because, we were taken out of that normal operating, type of behavior. And so it was, I really enjoyed it. It was quite fun, actually, in that way. Of course, COVID had, of course, it's terrible implications, but in that way, it was a really, interesting time for us to be able to be in that way innovating.
Sure. Aditya, when I compare from the time you would have entered the business 10 years back, now you can confidently say I own or I lead the business much more as compared to 10 years back when you would have just entered the business. So what kind of innovations you brought in the business when you came in and when you see them now 10 years later?
So, Punita, I would say that, the key contributor to the business from the team that was there with me and especially, my father who started the business was thought process. So, when we talk about innovation, it was so well ingrained and the business itself started with the idea that you wanted to try something new, categories such as oats and muesli in the early 90s when it was unheard of in India was a fairly steep, call to take. And I think from that perspective, the culture for innovation was always there. So that's something that I'd have to credit, the seasoned team that I got to work with. But along with that, I think what contribution I had, and that was a fairly important insight over the years. And as an organization and as a group, we'd been manufacturing for a long time. Our core DNA was manufacturing. We knew food fairly well. We knew how to work with grains. I think the entire consumer lens on the innovation front was what we wanted to marry. So earlier we were product people, that we knew how to make a great product and really put the best ingredients inside, the best processes and technology and try and offer that at a truly world-class manufacturing level. The innovations we worked on were more consumer-led over the last couple of years. So one example of that was the first protein-based breakfast cereal in India, which was whey protein-based. Traditionally, globally protein-based breakfast cereals were actually made with ingredients such as gluten, which aren't really great for you. But essentially, we created a breakfast cereal with whey protein, which is a more complete protein profile. And it was technologically very challenging because it's not an easy ingredient to work with in the form of cereal. So we had to do a lot of innovations in our process development. One of the other innovations which we did was actually around the kids cereal space. So that's a space we understood, to some degree. We had shied away from that space. In 2019, just before the pandemic, we entered that space. And the idea was that it's a big subcategory within breakfast cereals, but we didn't want to load in a cereal which had, artificial antioxidants, flavors, substances which we would not want to feed our kids. So instead we went for a grain base which was different from traditionally, what the lead ingredient was maida. We instead went for oats, rice, wheat, whole wheat atta, to get a much better, nutritional experience for the mothers and for our key stakeholders, which were the kids, and make it completely clean label, reduce the sweetness, and actually deliver something that emulated the same taste experience for the kids, but with a much superior nutritional profile. And that required a lot of innovation at the back end. And subsequently, we've seen, many people jump into that bandwagon. But that was something that we started with, and that was an innovation that I was also involved in. And I think one of the innovations we did was also packaging form innovation. So, that I can take some credit for. So when I was traveling for work across, we seldom find anything healthy at the airports, and now there are more choices. So one of the innovations we did was actually create a breakfast on the go pack, which globally is very, very popular. You'd have cereal packs all over the world. The only challenge was in India, milk isn't as widely available in a package form, and especially on the airlines. So we created an innovation for Indigo Airlines, and we ran with it for a while, which was basically a breakfast cereal in a cup with the milk pre-blended inside. So all you had to do was pour water till the line marked inside, and your cereal would be ready. And that's something which was so innovative that one of the global leaders in the breakfast cereal category actually created that this year in the UK. We just happened to do it like 4 years ago. But what I'm saying is that, those are all packaging form innovations that, we did, which we could take some credit for. But really our DNA comes from the fact that we don't want to do a regular product. We don't want to do something which is, the status quo. Everything we do at Bagri's by design has to be better. It has to be either a better ingredient, a more complete nutritional profile, or something that challenges the status quo in the category. Otherwise, it's not worth our time doing it.
Sure. Aditya, another thing I want to know is, in the 90s when your father started the business, of course, he was a market disruptor in terms of creating something new. And now when you look at the business 20 years later, there are a lot of startups, and particularly in the D2C space, who have come to challenge the brand, challenge this category, and there's so many options available. So now, do you find that the next innovation will come in with that in the business?
So I think, disruption, I think, is something that we'd have to live with. And in the consumer space, I would say that it's far lesser than in many of the other spaces that we've seen, like technology or B2B manufacturing, where, complete transformation has happened. So from a family business or a consumer business perspective, brands will have to keep on reinventing themselves faster. That's one. The other big advantage with the entire set of startups coming specifically in the nutrition and the health food space is that there's a lot more awareness also dialing up, for health, and especially post-pandemic. I think there has been tangible action from intent to purchase, which wasn't there earlier. If I talk about consumer behavior pre-pandemic, there was more intent than action. And now there's a significant amount of that intent converting to action of actual purchase and consumers choosing healthier lifestyles. Even though we've unlocked and moved back to what the earlier status quo was to some degree, but some of that stickiness in terms of investing in health is continued, and I think that's overall great for the consumer goods ecosystem. And there's a lot of innovation that startups bring along. I think with us, the DNA for innovation's always been there. Culturally, we are a lot more rooted like a startup in terms of trying something new. There's a big appetite for failure. There is, for example, we were very clear we did not want to do traditional cornflakes, and my father was someone who led that innovation. He said, we don't want to do plain cornflakes because it's utter junk. It's very low on the glycemic index, very high on the glycemic index, very low in fiber. It's made using preservatives which are banned in several countries, so he didn't want to touch them. but he attempted to make it healthier 2 times. Once, we tried infusing bran into the flake, it didn't work. We tried to blend it with oats, it didn't work. In 2016, we attempted a product where we got in fibers we imported from Germany, changed the entire manufacturing process, gave consumers the entire taste, look and feel of regular cornflakes, but delivered about 2.5 times the fiber, which in exchange also reduced the glycemic index. Glycemic index is a blood sugar variation, when you have any carb.
Yeah.
So the lower it is, the better for you in terms of sustainability, unless of course, you want to do some strenuous activity right afterwards. So the idea was to actually create something genuinely, honestly better than what's widely available in the market with a very clean label intent. So that DNA of a startup has been there. So in fact, for us, it's a very exciting time because a lot of things that we had in our portfolio, which we couldn't launch because market access was limited, is now actually, seeing a platform. And now not everything needs to go to every channel. So for example, if we've got distribution across, say 70,000 stores in India, we don't need to put everything in each and every store. You've got, specifics that you could do for your D2C, for e-commerce, or for, offline only. So market segmentations become a lot easier as well. And consumer acceptance.
Sure. Shruti, coming to you, you spoke about COVID challenges, and of course in the hospitality space we have seen the kind of challenging time this industry has seen. So did it further push you, those moments when, options are less, does it give space or birth to innovation at that time?
Absolutely. I think it was, like I mentioned, I think, we really, we were kind of given the space and the time to be able to focus a little bit, look inwards and say, okay, these are all the things that we really want to improve upon and that we think can be done a lot better than what is typically done. And so COVID was a really interesting time. Of course, it also, it was interesting because you also had a lot of opportunity to test things that you may not have had the focus to do so before. So for instance, one of the things that we did was launch a learning platform during that time, right? So, online learning is something which is done, worldwide, but in hospitality, it's always been very traditional of, you do training on the job and there's a way that you do it. Now, when everybody was stuck at home, and we as an organization took a call not to lay off anyone, we decided that, that time that's being spent at home should be used productively. And so what we did is we launched a platform which, number one, there was interactive sort of training that was being done, but there was also a platform on which we were able to create curriculum, load it, and then people were able to access it from wherever they were. And these were basic modules on a number of different topics. What we've done since then is take that same platform and use it as an assessment tool. So we tried to understand at each level what the competencies are for each role. And so based on that, managers on the go can essentially on their phones do assessment of each person within their department, which then feeds back into creating more customized, personalized training modules for the people who are there. This is something in hospitality which has not really been done before. And the way that I've approached this and innovations like this has been that we need to make them practical and useful for the end user. Oftentimes you have consultants, for instance, who will come in and they'll tell you, okay, this is what you should be doing, but then finally, will the end user actually use it? It's dicey, right? And especially in an industry like hospitality where things have been done a certain way and there's a certain rigor to it and things like that. So to change behavior is really, really difficult. And so, coming back, during COVID, we were able to do several of those types of innovations, actually. And like I said, technology was really fundamental to it. And I'm lucky in that sense that, the team has really come around to embrace how it can be used. We also launched a platform which was, it started off as sort of an internal Facebook, but today what it does is that any, Tamarite who is there, any person who works for us, they can log any sort of grievance, a maintenance request, a brand-related sort of request, anything they want on their phone. So essentially what that does is it creates ownership of that hotel for anyone who is stationed in that property. So you don't have to go tell your manager who goes and tells somebody else who goes to engineering, logs a complaint. Like there's nothing like that. It's completely democratized. So you can actually just take a photo, load it up, and it goes straight to engineering. So you have, the idea is that everybody is part of the organization. Everyone feels like this is a place that I want to take care of. I want to, I want it to look the best. And similarly, they can talk about guests as well. They actually log, saying like Aditya likes his coffee black with a little bit of sugar. Like, so things like that can be logged as well. And we're able to actually enhance guest experience as well. So it's, it was an incredible time for innovation. And I think, coming out of COVID, we've tried to keep that sense of innovation going, and that sense of entrepreneurship. And we're continuously thinking of how can we derive more from these phenomenal ideas that come up from every level of our organization.
Sure. In Shruti, your father, Mr. Shibulal, who has run a fairly large enterprise, Infosys, and he has seen various life cycles and growth cycles of business in his lifetime. So at times, when you are introducing a new innovative, say, platform or something new in the business, do you go to him and consult his ideas if he can guide you further in terms of whether it's going to work or backfire?
I don't know about whether it'll work or backfire part, but I do talk to him often. I mean, I'm incredibly lucky that I have somebody who's a very trusted sounding board, and it's, so I go for advice constantly, right? I mean, in the sense that we're, my dad and I are very close, so we talk all the time about, and we come up with ideas all the time. And he's great at trying, I'll come with an idea, and he's really good at trying to help us figure out how to make that into a real platform that can be used, I'm not from technology, so you can imagine a lot of the technology stuff which is done in my organization is really, it is with that help. Yeah. It's not separated at all. And he is the chairperson of my organization as well. So I have a wonderful board, beyond him as well. So it's, I think everyone needs somebody like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be your dad. I mean, it's wonderful if it is, but to have trusted mentors and people that have experience who can guide you, you can go to for advice, but who don't meddle, that's really something special, actually. And I think what it does is for like the next generation, for us, it gives us the ability to really spread our wings and to also make our own mistakes sometimes. But also to have somebody to kind of, to go to that you trust and that you know has your best interests at heart all the time, who's always aligned with you. So it's a very, very wonderful thing that I have and that I very much appreciate.
Sure. Aditya, you spoke about various kind of innovation, and innovation at times comes at the cost of a lot of failures. So I'm sure there might be a lot of failures and things which have not worked. So can you share some of those? And how far can you go in terms of, how much time we should give for that innovation to give us results?
So, that's a very good question, I must say. And in our journey at Bagri's, we've experienced that several times over. And I think if you want to be a disruptor, if you want to innovate, the probability of failure is not something that should, deter you in any way. So the cornflakes example I gave earlier, we were clear that we did not want to do the run-of-the-mill cornflakes, so as to speak. So we tried once, we tried twice, it didn't work. Timeline-wise, the first attempt was 2011, second attempt was 2014. Eventually, in 2016, we struck gold with, the third time around that we tried that innovation. So persistence is extremely important. And many of the categories, especially in the consumer space, is also about, entering at the right time. So many of our failures or many of the things that we actually rolled back were categories we entered which were way before time. To give an example, we were the first brand in India to actually launch nutrition bars, which was a category we did in '98. Um, the category is still boutique now, it's picking up. So today you'd see, some brands of bars in the market, but we attempted that in '98 and were fairly successful in a fairly small cohort. So we decided to, go after things that we felt could scale at that point of time. We tried brown rice back in the early '90s when brown rice was also, way before time. We tried a millet-based cereal. So the persistence with many of those lasted for a few years to a few months in some cases. But I would say some of the reasons to roll back were supply chain oriented. The supply chain wasn't ready. Like in the case of, brown rice, the millet-based cereal, there wasn't good quality, back-end infra available to segregate the rice at that point of time. Or in the case of the millet-based cereal, the technology to stabilize millets wasn't there, which, something we worked on for quite a while to develop. Or in the case of nutrition bars, the category wasn't, ready by any measure because consumers would, compare a chocolate granola bar to a 5 rupee Cadbury's, which was, available out of the same counter. So now those categories are evolving and, they're all existent on the shelf. So I think timing is very important with innovation. I think that judgment of whether a market is ready for that, level of disruption or not, especially in the consumer space, is easier than technology, I would say, because you'd have some trends or some, indicators to be able to see that. The other big ability in our space is that we don't need to do everything at a massive scale. You can try it out at a smaller scale. You could see if that product's working. You could do live testing with the product. And what I'd mentioned earlier was that now that the ecosystem's, so omni-channel, so you can actually choose if you want to run a product offline, you want to run it online, whether you want to run it only out of A platform or B platform, which is relevant. Because even in the e-commerce space now, there's so much variation. There's Q-commerce, there is, basket building grocery, there is, there's obviously social commerce, which is coming up. There are channels which are focusing specifically for tier 2. So you've got an entire flavor of things that you could work with. So I think that segmentation is very important. But in terms of patience, persistence, and timing it right is very, very important. If you're not persistent, if you give up after your first attempt, then your probability of failure will probably always be high because we're very fortunate if we get something lucky for the first time. But once we take all of that learning, we are seeing that if we launch X number of products, chances are that many of them will stick around now a lot more than what they did 10 years ago, because there is better acceptance and consumer understanding on how to and where to sell, what we're launching.
Sure. And Aditya, when the organization has reached a certain scale, do you think, that makes it difficult to bring some new innovation in the organization because the processes are already set, there is a certain mindset with which other leaders and employees would work? How difficult it is to introduce innovation at a later stage or a growth stage of a company?
So I'd say, that's where I've seen a lot of organizations, face roadblocks. But even if I look at our industry, there are organizations who've managed to do it successfully, and many of them, have been very founder-driven. So if the culture is coming for innovation from the top, if your board, your founders, not shy away from embracing failure, then typically that's not, a major challenge. Also, it depends on how the organization's DNA is built. So, for example, at Bagri's, consumer feedback is important, market research is important to a certain degree, data is very important, but a lot of it comes from the fact that let's take a category, understand what are the challenges nutritionally with that category that consumers are facing today. Are they having something which is perceived to be good for them but is actually not? Can we go ahead and make something better? So because the thought process is to actually not go from the fact that, will this work in the market from a taste perspective? Is it commercially viable for you? And hence, we look at things from a commercial perspective or a taste perspective, which is typical in FMCG. Instead, at Bagri's, what we do is we go out and see, is this the best possible product that I can make for my consumer? And we'll work around ways to make it commercially viable. And that's how we've developed, products which initially were thought of as niche, but have, found a much larger acceptance. But the ethos in terms of what we'd want to put inside was not something that we, tinkered around with. So, it had to be really the best ingredients that we can get our hands on, the best processes that we could put, a lot of them developed in-house. So as we are scaling up, I think the key task for us has become to actually drive them into the next generation team as well. So now a lot of the innovations are coming bottom up. So we've entered a few categories which were recommendations from food tech interns that we had in the organization, which is what, I've really cherished, that there was ownership saying that, why don't we go after this? They did the research, figured out that these are categories that, we can get into. This is, the challenge in the category, and this is how we can fix it. So that cultural mindset of the entrepreneurs passing down to, someone right at the entry level of the organization was something that, we really want to nurture.
Sure. And Shruti, when you got into starting Tamara, I mean, there are two aspects to this question. One, how was your family's reaction in terms of getting into a different segment altogether? And secondly, hospitality, of course, is a very, very challenging space. So how did you look at that in terms of launching something innovative at that time?
So firstly, I think I got into hospitality, that restaurant business I mentioned. I was 22 or 23 when I started. And at the time, I think my parents were thrilled that I had found something that I could focus on and could drive. So it was actually a really positive reaction. Actually, I thought the reaction would be very, I didn't think they would want me to move back to India, actually, at that time. And when they heard it, they were like, is that it? Yes, please, please come home, So, in finding it, they were, they were extremely supportive. And I think, they always wanted me to feel like I had ownership and accountability over what I was doing. And so that was really wonderful. I think, the other thing is, I entered when I was 22, 23. So, the world is your oyster at that point, and you're a little bit on top of the world, and you think you could accomplish everything and anything. And I have to say, in those early years, I did face some failures. It was very, very difficult, and the restaurant business, unsurprisingly, is an incredibly difficult one to be in. And I think that taught me a lot, right? It taught me a lot in terms of how to face challenges and how to overcome, how to be resilient, how to roll with it, and just, how do you get past some of these hurdles? So, there may have been a bit of naivete, I think, at that time when I first entered. Now, of course, things have changed. I've seen quite a lot, and I would say again during COVID, for many of us, 2 years probably felt like 20 years of learning. And it was, it's something I think that, we've had to face the challenge whether we like it or not and get past it. So I think in the initial days, I wasn't very fearful. I think when you're young, I mean, that's the beauty, right, of entrepreneurship and being in that startup world. You really do feel like, I can figure this out. I'll come out of it. We're gonna do it, and it's quite brave if you think back on it, and yeah, I mean, I think I still try to hold on to a little bit of it, but of course now, there is a bit more of a risk averseness and all of that comes with age and experience.
Sure, great. So due to paucity of time, we'll conclude the session here, but we'll keep the session open for our audience in case there are any questions anyone wants to ask. Please raise your hand and the mic will be passed on to you. The gentleman at the back.
Hey. This is a question for Aditya. So I understand that you are into FMCG and we're into skincare, one common denominator being it's a D2C business. So we've just started and we are, trying to find ways of how we can create acceptability. So since you're into FMCG, can you tell us how in the initial years you created acceptability for your product and how you do it now with any new products that you bring to the market?
Can I have your name, please?
I am Prakhar Goyal.
Prakhar. Prakhar, thank you so much for the question. And, it's very pertinent. And given the fact that you're in a very unique category of skincare, which is very different from our journey, I would say that a lot of it is contextual to the category itself. But some of the key levers we used initially, which, might be applicable to skincare as well, given the fact that most of these categories aren't impulse, driven, they're, more informative and trial based, was the fact that we looked at generating trials to get awareness. So, reach out to key influencers in the 90s and the early 2010s, which weren't on Instagram at that point of time. They were, either nutritionists, gym trainers, doctors whom we would sample, give out a fair amount of information to, a lot of sampling at points of sale where the decision was actually made for consumers to be able to try and experience what would make, say, our muesli different, and explain those differences at point of sale. So there's a traditional offline route of doing it. Obviously, today you have a fair amount of media available in the form of social media or various ways from digital PR, where you could actually talk about your differentiation, and obviously D2C, there's a fair amount of tech available for you to be able to segment your consumer cohort to be able to do it. But I don't think anything goes away from actual consumer trial. So if a consumer is able to experience your product, sample it out, and today, fortunately, with D2C platforms or with marketplaces, you've got the ability to track that if someone's actually tried my product, has he or she purchased my regular retail pack? And I think that's data that you'd have available to yourself as a founder. So I think that is one very important form. Whether you do it offline or online totally depends on your route to market. And I think similarly, you've got so many awareness platforms that you could leverage on. But what I would say is key is to actually have real clarity in terms of your differentiators and what your brand stands for, because there is clutter in every category that's happening, whether it's nutrition, whether it's skincare, whether it's whether it's personal care. So having fairly clear communication as to why you would make the decision a lot more easier for consumers to actually pivot to. But I hope that helps answer your question to a certain degree.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Please pass on the mic to the gentleman here.
Good afternoon. Ma'am, the question is that being in the hospitality sector, what unique value proposition have you created in a highly competitive segment? And is sustainability a huge enough factor which makes you stand apart from the competition and something which your consumer values a lot?
Yeah, so I think, thank you for the question. Sorry, your name?
Daksh, ma'am.
Dakshna, thank you. Right, so the way that we look at hospitality, as I explained, is in this idea of responsible hospitality. And so we look at this, we look at the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit. And that's how our goals, our strategies, everything across the organization is structured and created. In terms of differentiation, so we have 3 different brands, and each one of them are very distinct in what we offer, right? So if you look at our mid-segment brand, it's called Lilac. Our statement is we are safe, clean, and we provide value for money. And what we're doing is we're going into places like Guruvayur, into Kumbakonam, which are these pilgrimage centers, where 80% of the travel and tourism in India is still happening, but there are no safe, clean, value for money propositions available. So we differentiate ourselves in that way, in that segment. And if you look at the other end, which is our luxury leisure segment, where we have resorts, we are providing unique experiences for our guests which are truly local to that destination. So you cannot take my property from Coorg and plant it in Alapi. You can't take that property, plant it in Kodai. It won't make any sense. So the idea is that we create these experiences that are only of that place and are truly authentic and local for that place. That is the guest experience that we provide. there is also this sense of responsibility and sustainability that come into play. Now, I think Aditya also mentioned the consumer behavior is changing, right? So pre-COVID, in fact, we would have seen less, it was maybe 5 to 10% of our consumers that really cared that, oh, you're a responsible brand, okay, we'll choose you over somebody else because of the responsibility aspect. Typically, consumers in India in the hospitality, when they're looking for a place to go to, they're looking at service, they're looking at food, and they're looking at value. It's changing, right? So that 10% is now probably closer to 25 to 30%. It's, I'm quite pessimistic. Actually, a lot of people will disagree with me in that I don't think it'll become the leading factor for why a consumer will choose my business over another. I still think that service is going to be the most important thing. But I do think it matters more, and I do think that people are looking at it much more strongly, and if you don't have some aspect that you're showing, right, that you're being responsible, it does now, we're at that point where the new consumers really don't appreciate that. They want to know that the businesses that they're patronizing are responsible in some way or form. So I do think it's changing quite a lot, and in India specifically, I think it's actually made huge strides in the food space for sure, in my industry as well.
So with this, we would like to conclude the session, and I would like to thank Aditya and Shruti, both of them, for opening their playbook of innovation and sharing it with our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.